Right.
So I'd like to welcome Colin Redwood G6MXL. Colin has spoken at Denbigh Radio Club before and is a regular contributor to the magazine Practical Wireless. And Colin's subject tonight is getting started in amateur radio. So Colin, over to you.
Right. Thanks very much, Nick. Are you all seeing the front screen of my presentation?
We are, yep.
Excellent. Good. So we're in the right league then. So a little bit about myself. For those of you who don't know me, I was licensed in 1982 and I've operated on most amateur bands from 80 meters up to 10 gigs over the years, using FM, SSB, fast and slow scan TV, RTTY, PSK, J265, and more recently FT8 and FT4. You'll notice a lack of CW there. I'm not a CW operator. And I'm more of an operator than a constructor. That's not to say I've never constructed, but on the whole, I'm more of an operator than a constructor. And my setup at home is very simple. It's 100 watts on a good day to a dipole in a very small back garden. But for the last 6 months, I've been running at just 10 watts. And I've been writing for Practical Wireless for over 25 years now, off and on. And I've also been adjudicating the Practical Wireless 2-meter QRP contest for the last 12 years or so. So apart from having sort of got past the radio amateurs exam in 1982, I've got no relevant formal qualifications unless you class A-level maths and A-level physics as relevant. That's the extent of it. I've never worked in radio or electronics or teaching. I teach the feeders and antennas, the propagation and operating bits at my local club for the 3 levels. But I have no commercial interest in the hobby apart from writing Practical Wireless articles. And I've come to the HF bands from a VHF UHF DXing background. I moved house 17 years ago, 17 years ago, I think. And that was the point where I basically had to stop. I couldn't put up a tower with nice big Yagis on it anymore. And I had to put up with wire dipoles in the back garden here, and only one at a time. So it's a fairly simple setup here. Now, during the talk, I'm going to make some suggestions, and they're based very much on my experience of what has worked for me. That doesn't mean that other approaches won't work. It doesn't mean that if I don't suggest a particular radio or antenna, it's not suitable for a beginner. It's simply that I have not used it or tried it. So it's very difficult for me to recommend or suggest something if I've not tried it or used it. So I'm sticking to what I know has worked for me. So what I'm going to do, we've done the introduction. I'm going to talk briefly about the different amateur radio licenses in the UK, because I know we've got people at various stages in their journey through their amateur radio licenses, and we've also got people from around the world who won't be familiar with the license set up in the UK. I'll talk a little bit about the impact of COVID-19 on the way amateur radio exams are being run at the moment. Then get on to looking at getting equipped once you've got your license, connecting it all together, and your first contact. And then I'm just going to touch very briefly on data modes, because I think they are exciting for newcomers to the hobby. And I think they do have some great potential to allow people to make contacts with low power. Then I'll wrap up with a couple of 3 conclusions and open it up for questions. So that's the plan. So let's look at the licensing situation in the UK. We have a 3-tier licensing arrangement. people start off with a foundation license coming in. It's those coming into the hobby now. Start off with a foundation license, progress to an intermediate license, then finally a full license. You have to pass these in sequence. Now that can be years apart, months apart, or a few minutes apart. You can't sit an intermediate exam if you haven't passed can't demonstrate you've passed a foundation license. That could be as little as 5 minutes ago, or it could be 10 years ago. There's no point, once you've got your foundation license, it's good for life. Same with the intermediate, same with the full. Each of the exams associated with those 3 licenses are multiple choice exams. And in normal circumstances, they're sat at clubs, either on paper or online. Either way, there are invigilators present. Unlike some countries like the States, the question banks are not published. They are closely guarded secret. I think there's only about sort of 6 or 8 people in the whole of the UK who have access to them. And we had a fairly major update to the syllabus that came into effect in September 2019. So people are still getting used to a new syllabus. So teaching, particularly at the full level, is only just starting to come back up to full strength. So what do you get if you get a foundation license? Well, you're allowed to use 10 watts on most bands, and you've got access to most bands from low frequencies up to 70 centimeters. So you've got LF frequency, low frequencies, medium and high frequencies, VHF and UHF 70 centimeters, plus you've got 1 microwave band at 10 gigahertz. You can use any mode, CW, SSB, SSTV, you name it. And to all intents and purposes, you're not allowed to transmit using transmitters that you've home built. And effectively, you can't operate abroad. Now, in normal circumstances, the 2 routes to get a foundation license are either to take your foundation exam, and tacked onto that is some practical assessments, such as adjusting an antenna for minimum SWR and making a few contacts under supervision. Or an alternative route is via the air cadets. Now, not many people are aware of that, but that's an alternative route to get a foundation license. Moving on to the intermediate license, this gives you 50 watts on most bands, and you get access to just about every band. There's a few exceptions. You get access to just about every band from amateur band, from the lowest frequencies up to the top of the microwave bands. All modes, and you can operate using home-built equipment. But again, because it's not a HAREC compliant exam, you can't operate abroad with it. The full license gives you 400 watts on most bands. There's some bands where you can't run as much power. You've got all bands from LF to the top of the microwave bands, all modes. You can operate using homebrew equipment, and you can operate abroad in countries that accept a HAREC compliant exam. HAREC stands for Harmonized Amateur Radio something or other certificate. And you can operate maritime mobile. Just one thing for those of you who are a little bit more old school, the full license used to be called the advanced license. Now, what was the impact of this wretched virus had on it? Well, all the exams can now be sat online at home with remote invigilation via webcam. Now, I must admit, when I first heard that this was going to be possible, I thought, well, this is going to be a bit, this is going to be open to cheating. Well, some of the top guys at the RSGB actually had a go at doing these, trying various techniques to cheat, and that each and every one of them were found out. So I think it's fairly well established that you can't cheat. This method of entry is proving exceedingly popular. They're running in the order of 600 exams per month across the three levels. During the lockdown, during the period where we can't meet face to face to do exams and so on, the practical assessments for the foundation exam have been dropped. And the practical assessments for the intermediate have also been dropped permanently. So when normal service resumes, the expectation is that the foundation practical assessments will return. So we've got roughly 600 people coming into the hobby each month without any practical experiences. And as Nick mentioned earlier, there's a lot of queries appearing on Facebook groups. So there's lots of newcomers and potential newcomers wanting guidance. And also, perhaps not so obvious, there's a lot of people returning to the hobby after many years. Perhaps people who got past their exam back in the 1980s, 1990s, or even earlier in some cases. Lockdown, plenty of time on their hands, got a load of radio equipment in the loft gathering dust for many years, and they're seeing this coronavirus as an opportunity to return to a hobby that they used to enjoy some time ago. Perhaps the family have grown up now, and so there's a lot of people coming back to the hobby after many years, and the hobby's changed quite a lot in the last 30-40 years. What triggered me to start writing the Getting Started series in Practical Wireless was this post I saw on Facebook. There's a guy who'd passed his foundation exam saying, "Help, I know I want to make international contacts, but I don't want to exclude the ability to make local contacts. Got space for a stealth antenna in the loft or a garden where I could put up a fairly discreet antenna." But he hadn't got a clue whatsoever of what rig, what power supply, what antenna tuner unit, what filters, what meters to get started with. And these are his words. And he said, I know it's a case of how long is a piece of string, but there are so many options out there. Some have built-in power supplies, some don't. Some have an SWR, some don't. Some need filters, some don't. He's a bit of a loss. Any guidance would be greatly appreciated. And when I saw that, I thought, yeah, there must be probably 600 people a month coming into the hobby virtually in that position, plus people coming back to the hobby. It seemed like that there was a cry for some help here. And I thought, well, Practical Wireless being available over the counter in Smith's, unlike Radcom, is probably the best place to do something to help. So let's go right back to basics. So you're interested in becoming a radio amateur. How do you find a foundation training course? Well, Essex Hams are probably the leaders, if you like, and they've certainly been running training courses for the foundation level only for, I don't know, 5-6 years now. A more recent entrant into the market is William McFarland, GM6DX, and he's got some good material as well. And some local clubs are running training via Zoom or Skype or something like that. I know my local club in Poole here, we finished off a number of training courses that had already started with Zoom, and we also run a few additional sessions on a one-to-one or one-to-small group basis. Now, in terms of the materials that are available, the things that I think anybody who's wanting to sit the foundation exam needs to get hold of is a copy of the syllabus, which you can get from the RSGB. You can download that. The reference material, this is the booklet that you'll have available to you in the exam. Now, you don't obviously need to learn what's in this booklet, but there's a lot of very good, useful stuff in it that you're going to put yourself at a disadvantage if you, A, don't have it with you, and B, don't get familiar with what is there so that you can find it quickly. The foundation book, which you can see on your right, which is the training manual, if you like. You can also download some mock exams from the RSGB, and regardless of where you go for your training, I think you need to get hold of all of these from the RSGB. There is a fee for the foundation book. The manual you see there is chargeable. I think it's $4.99, and I think it's post-free if I remember rightly. It's certainly not going to break the bank. Once you've done your training, the next thing to do is to book your exam. And you can do that and pay for it on the RSGB website. You basically choose a date that you want and choose a time slot, and you can book. Now, what I would say is typically these slots are booked up at least 6 weeks ahead. So today when I went in and had a look, the earliest exam I could book would be the 8th of January. So just over a month. So it's probably 5 weeks away. So what I would say is as soon as you sort of think you're within striking distance of being ready for the exam, book your exam so that you're doing the exam whilst all your learning is reasonably fresh in your mind. Now, when you come to take the exam, whilst we're under the coronavirus restrictions, the invigilator will contact you and check that you have a suitable computer and a suitable webcam. During the exam, you'll have the reference material available. And for example, there's that DB conversion table on the right there. So you don't need to learn that, but you do need to know that's in the book, in the reference material that you will have available in the exam. And that's one less thing to learn, but also it's a way of getting some easy marks. The invigilator will guide you through everything beforehand, and they'll keep a close eye on you during the exam. Typically, an invigilates only one or the maximum 2 candidates at any one simultaneously. And you'll know your result within a few minutes of finishing. So it's a very straightforward process. 600 people are doing it each month. Very, very, very straightforward, and it's going down well. You have to wait a few days for some formal paperwork to come through from the RSGB. Typically, it takes around 6 days. During that time, if you've got an appeal, you thought that question 27 was, you couldn't see a right answer there, or there's some reason that there was a query, or the invigilator thought you were cheating or something like that, that's the time to sort of instigate an appeal. Otherwise, the RSGB typically take about 6 days. If they send you some information through, I think through the post, and then you can apply for your license on the Ofcom website. Ofcom are our regulator in the UK. And you can choose your call sign from the remaining calls in the M7, the Mike 7 series, which is the series of call signs available for foundations. The way you apply for your license is the same if you're applying for an intermediate or a full license, by the way. Moving on to the intermediate, there's training courses available from William McFarland, GM6DX. and some local clubs are offering training again via Zoom and Skype. The Bath Remote Learning have just restarted their training after they sort of took a breather to catch up with the new syllabus. And if you are doing wanting to do an intermediate course, they certainly have a very, very good reputation. As regards the materials you need, yeah, you need the syllabus. I think you certainly need the reference material. There's more of it in, there's more reference material available for the intermediate exam, and you need the intermediate book. One thing I would emphasize is make sure you get the very latest edition. There was some a new edition came out, I'm going to say about a month ago, roughly of that time scale. That's got a number of corrections, clarifications, a few things that have been taken out, which, whilst it was nice, actually didn't contribute very much to anybody's ability to pass the exam, and some mock exams. Again, all available from the RSGB. Moving on to the full exam, I think it's fair to say that the full training for the full course, for the full exam, is fairly thin on the ground. The Bath Remote Learning Group are planning a full course for the spring of 2021. Some local clubs maybe offer training via Zoom or Skype. And one of the Cornish clubs, and I can't remember which one it is, has some videos, but they're based on the old syllabus. Now, most of that will still be very, very relevant. It might duplicate a bit stuff that you've actually covered in the intermediate, but if you go through those and sort of feel comfortable with them, you're well on the way. One of the things that people say to me as regards the full license in particular is they find the maths can be a bit daunting. Well, Keith Williams, GW40KT, has got a book that you can download from the Chester and District Amateur Radio Society, and it goes through everywhere in the syllabus where there's a calculation and shows you exactly, puts the calculation in context and shows you how to do the calculation on a calculator. It's free to download, and I can't help feeling it plugs a gap for those who perhaps are struggling a little bit with maths in general, and I would certainly recommend it. Keith Williams is also one of the people who support the Bath Remote Learning Group. So he knows his stuff. He's been teaching radio amateur exams of one sort or another for decades. So he's seen everything, and I would certainly recommend that. So again, up at the full level, you've got the syllabus, the reference material. There's a lot of it. I think it runs to something like 18 pages. Don't quote me on that, but it's quite a lot of pages. So you really need to get hold of that well in advance of your exam to get familiar with what's there. It's got a lot of the license conditions in it. You'll probably find that 5, 10, 15, 20% of the questions in the exam can be answered by reference to that reference material. But you don't have time in the exam to search through that reference material book for the first time. You need to be familiar with what's there. You know, oh yes, license conditions, that's sort of towards the front. The table of whatever, antenna gains or whatever, it's towards the back. Get familiar with it. It's an absolute godsend, and by and large, people who fail the full license exam fail. One of the main reasons for failure is they're not familiar enough with what is in that reference material book. Because that booklet gives you so much good stuff, but you need to be familiar with it. I saw an example recently. Somebody on Facebook said, "Oh, I'm not going to bother with the reference material. I haven't downloaded it. You know, I've read the book. I've done the mock exams," and believe it or not, they failed simply because they didn't bother to download it and get familiar with what's there. And there's some mock exams available from the RSGB as well. Now, there's one other book that the RSGB publish called Exam Secrets. And it's really helpful for those preparing for the full license, but I think it's also useful for people preparing for the intermediate and the foundation exam. There are mock questions in there covering every single syllabus item for the foundation, the intermediate and the full. There's also some text and workings for areas where experiences suggest that people struggle a little bit. So it's rewording, looking at topics from a slightly different angle, which I think a lot of people will find useful, particularly at the full license, preparing for the full exam. So we've passed our exam, we've applied for a license, we need to get equipped, we need to equip our station. Now there's 2 or 3 things I would say as sort of guiding principles. Don't get into an endless cycle of buying new transceivers. I see on Facebook people saying, "Oh, I've had this transceiver for 6 months, I fancy a change." Well, I don't think you can even get really familiar with a transceiver in 6 months. And a different transceiver with essentially transmitting the same power on the same bands is going to give you effectively the same results. I think there's a lot to be said for making the most of what you have. And above all, don't underestimate the importance of antennas and to a lesser extent feeders. If you're not getting good results, the place to look is your antenna system, not your transceiver. Now, if you were starting out to sort of travel on the roads, you can see from that picture, from those pictures there, you've got quite a lot of choice open to you. And in every case, you know, if you look at the car, that red car in there, you've got a vast choice of cars of different engine sizes, different manufacturers, different colors. You've got a vast choice of ways of getting around on the roads. Just the same applies to amateur radio. You've got lots of choice of equipment for making contacts on the air. No particular piece of equipment is the right one. They come at prices in round numbers going from £30 up to £3,000. If you want just local contacts, then you could consider a VHF, UHF, FM only handheld transceiver. With these, you'll often find that there's an external microphone available as an option, and that often is a lot better than the built-in one. And the supplied antenna will often limit the range effectively. You need to set up the frequencies on which you want that transceiver to transmit on. If you're going to use repeaters, you'll need to program the input and output frequencies and the CT CSS tone frequencies of the repeaters. if you don't program these handhelds correctly, you risk transmitting outside the amateur band. Another variation on mainly handhelds, but there are some what I'd call base station versions as well, is digital voice. Again, this is predominantly a VHF, UHF technology. The one thing to remember is that the three types of digital voice modes, C4FM, DMR, and D-Star, are totally incompatible with each other. So a DMR transceiver cannot make contact with a D-Star transceiver. I would, if you're thinking of going for a digital voice transceiver, I would strongly recommend getting advice from local amateurs. If you buy a DMR transceiver in an area which has only got a D-Star repeater, you're not going to make many contacts. And these handhelds are expensive. You know, we're talking £300, certainly 150 upwards. So I personally have no experience of these digital voice modes, but I merely pass on my recommendation that before going that way, before embarking on a purchase, you seek advice from local amateurs about what is available, is actually available in your local area, and what is actually used. Because there may be a local repeater, but if nobody uses it, you're no better off. If you want to do what I would call VHF, UHF DXing, in other words, to have contacts on the VHF and UHF bands beyond your local area, then you're going to need an SSB transceiver, and almost by definition, it will come with a CW, a Morse code option as well. They are a lot more expensive than FM only. Even second-hand, you're looking at £150 upwards in most cases. And you're going to want a rotatable Yagi antenna that you've got high up and in the clear. Now, if you don't have the, if you're not able to put an antenna, you know, a big Yagi up in your back garden, you might want to consider taking the equipment and going up on a local hill and operating portable. So don't dismiss VHF DXing just because you haven't got a suitable place to put a mast up at home. Whatever you do, regardless of whether it's FM or CW, if you're or SSB, if you're going to play VHF, UHF with external antennas, don't waste money on poor coax. You really do need good coax so that you don't get a lot of feeder loss. RG58, which is fine for HF, is not suitable at VHF. You'll easily lose the majority of your power. So if you've got 10 watt output transmitter, it's very easily to see that go down to 2.5 watts or less through RG58. And of course, those losses also apply on signals coming in that you're receiving. If you want regular contacts beyond your local area and abroad, then you're going to need an HF transceiver. Now, you've got a vast choice, and I think it's fairly safe to say that any transceiver from the last 10 years, from Alinco, Elecraft, ICOM, Kenwood, Yaesu, are all perfectly good candidates for you to consider. Secondhand is fine. I don't see any problem in buying a secondhand HF transceiver from a reputable dealer. If you're buying from another amateur, then I think you should take an experienced amateur with you to check the transceiver over. You're not looking for a Rolls-Royce or Ferrari of amateur radio to start with. Provided it can put out 100 watts that you can turn, where you can turn the power down to 10 watts or less, and put out a clean signal on SSB, then that's all you really need in terms of the transmit. And as long as you can hear signals, that's all you need. Anything better than that is great, but it's going to cost. If you're buying secondhand, you're probably looking at sort of £300 to £500 as a sort of a fairly typical minimum. If you're buying new, you're looking at probably £600–700 upwards to 3,000 or so. And I would choose, unless you're buying a transceiver only to use away from home, out on hilltops or something, I would choose a transceiver with 100 watt output that you can turn down to 10 watts or less. That way, you're future proofing it for your, as you move up from foundation to intermediate to full. So which HF bands do you go for? Well, I think it's best to aim to get to learn one band. Get familiar with the propagation and what you can do on one band before you move on to another. So if you're at home during the day, then I'd suggest 20 meters. There's always plenty of activity during the day. At this time of year, the long nights, there's virtually no propagation overnight. If you're only at home during the evenings, then 40 meters is a better choice. That band will give you contacts just about all the time. If you don't like weekend contests, then I'd suggest 17 meters during the day. But that certainly dies even before 20 meter dies in the evenings. So out of those bands, you've got plenty of activity. All three bands give you plenty of activity on CW, on Morse code, on SSB, and on data modes. Before you decide, though, consider the antenna, because that might be a key factor in deciding which band you start off with. And let's face it, most modern transceivers cover all the HF bands. Now, this may seem a little bit controversial because I'm not going to talk about long wires, G5 RVs and verticals, simply because I've no experience of using them. I'm a firm advocate of half-wave dipole antennas. You can make them at home or you can buy them commercially. Visually, they're not too intrusive. They can be configured in a number of different ways, and they're resonant on the design band. So you don't need an antenna matching unit or ATU, as their impedance is roughly 50 ohms rather. If you go for some of these other antennas, you're going to need an ATU. There's a commercial half-wave dipole. You'll see it's got the grey box in the center is where the two halves join. There's a balun inside, and you can screw some coax in via PL259 to the bottom. And there's insulators on the end to which you can attach string and string it up between trees, house gutters, and so on. Now, you'll remember from your foundation course that dipoles are balanced antennas, so you need a balun. Now, you can make a choke balun with just a few coils of coaxial feeder, such as what you see on the right. It doesn't have to be on a metal former. You just want something, you just need to make sure that the coax sort of stays in place. And by using a balun, you can use, you've got a wider choice of feeder available, and RG58 feeder is perfectly adequate for the HF bands, and it's not too expensive. And if anybody wants to challenge me on that, I'm more than happy to defend that later. Now, dipoles don't have to be just strung up horizontally between two supports. You can operate them as an inverted V. So if you look in the middle there, the actual antenna is like an upside down letter V, and the feeder goes up to the center. Now that can be quite a good arrangement, because if you're going to the bit of an antenna that you want to get the highest is ideally the center part. So an inverted V is a very good choice of antenna arrangement. But not everybody can install a high support in the middle of where they want to put their antenna. So a sloper, where you've got a high, the one end of the antenna is high, the other end is lower, can work just as well. You can abuse dipoles in all sorts of ways. I've had a dipole which looking down on it was a sharp V on 40 meters, and I worked all sorts of DX with it. So don't feel that you can't sort of zigzag it or slope it, or the way I've got my dipole at home is it's roughly like the horizontal one, but the middle of it sags dramatically, but it works. Here's an idea for how you could sort of install a wire antenna. It doesn't even need to be a dipole in this instance, but I've just got a circular screw into just below the eaves of the house, and the string comes through it and goes down to a cleat about 2.5 meters above the ground, sort of 7 or 8 feet above the ground. So high enough for an adult to reach, but not for a child to reach. Does the job for me fine. That's been up now for 6-7 years, no problems. At the other end, I've got a pole with a pulley on it, so I can pull up the other end, and that's tied off to a cleat or something similar lower down. But it could equally be a tree. I've seen people use a bucket filled with concrete to provide the weight to keep the tension on. There's all sorts of things you can do. Just let your imagination run wild. Moving on to power supplies. If money is tight, then you might want to consider using a car battery initially. Now, if you're only running 10 watts, car battery will provide enough power, enough current for a number of hours operating. I'm not suggesting it's the perfect source of power, but it will certainly get you started. What I would suggest is not connecting the car battery to your transceiver whilst you are charging it. So either the transceiver or the charger is connected to the car battery, not both at the same time. If you're going to go for a mains power supply, which I think most people end up doing, broadly speaking, they fall into two main camps. One is what I would call a linear power supply, and one is a switch mode. Now, linear power supplies are big and heavy, if they're any good. They have a large transformer, they have a rectifier, they have large smoothing capacitors, and they have a load of transistors on the back to regulate. In an ideal world, if money was no object, space was no object, weight was no object, I'd go for a mains linear power supply. But they are they're typically 2 to 3 times the price of a switch mode power supply. Switch mode power supplies are much smaller and much lighter. The one thing to bear in mind with switch mode power supplies is that they can, not necessarily always, but may produce some RF noise, which may mean that when you tune to a particular frequency, you get some buzzing noise. The better ones have a means of adjusting the frequency, the oscillator frequency inside the power supply, to move that noise up or down a little bit so that it doesn't interfere with your operating. That I think is a good compromise. As with all power supplies, remember, red is positive, black is negative. So you've got your power supply, you need to connect it to your transceiver. Mainly power supplies are connected through a connector on, like you see on the right hand side there. It's a multi-pole connector. Typically you have 2 or 3 of those poles will be used for positive, 2 or 3 for negative. But for smaller low power transceivers, it may come through one of these barrel connectors. Just be very, very careful that the polarity of the wiring and the barrel connector. This particular transceiver has positive in the center and negative on the outer. Some transceivers, the old Yaesu FT290 and its 70 centimeter and 6 meter counterparts, had it the other way round. So be very careful that you don't go and use an old barrel connector power supply with a modern transceiver without checking the polarity. Remember, red is positive, black is negative. You then need to look at your connecting your antenna. Your feeder is going to come down, and in most cases you'll have a PL259 plug on it, which will need to be screwed into the SO239 antenna socket, which you can see on the bottom right of that picture. I'm assuming no antenna matching unit or ATU, because I'm assuming you've put up a dipole on the band that you're going to use it for. You can listen on other bands, but you shouldn't transmit on bands where your antenna isn't resonant without using an AMU or ATU. They're alternative terms. The guys who developed the amateur radio syllabus like to call it an antenna matching unit, but if you go into a shop, they sell antenna tuner units. They'll look at you blankly if you ask for an antenna matching unit. They're one and the same thing. You then need to plug in your microphone, and different microphones have different connectors, and different transceivers have different connectors. On the left is a connector to plug in an external microphone into a particular handheld transceiver. On the right is a plug that looks a bit like a phone plug, or a landline phone plug, or network plug, and that's quite common on the lower priced HF transceivers. And in the center is a typically 8-pin circular plug that you push in and screw. Just be careful, the wiring on those varies from manufacturer to manufacturer, and even between one transceiver and another from the same manufacturer. So don't assume just because it physically will fit that the wiring is the right way around. So be careful if you use different microphones to the one that should be the one that's designed to go with your transceiver. So we've got our set up, what do we do? Well, let's see if we can make our first contact. Okay, switch on and select the band on your transceiver for the antenna that is designed for. So if we put up a 20-meter dipole, we'll tune to the 20-meter band. So that's the 14 megahertz band. And what I suggest you do is select, let's say SSB, and I would tune around for the strongest signals you can find on the band. Because if you're starting out with a foundation license, you've only got 10 watts. You want to know that you ideally want to work somebody who's got a well-equipped, good antenna system, which means that they're producing a very strong signal with you. Listen for a station that's calling CQ, not one that's calling CQDX, because typically you're going to work somebody in Europe, an Italian, somebody from Slovenia, Germany, Poland, Spain, probably going to be the sort of countries that you're going to contact first. After they've called CQ, transmit your call sign phonetically. If you don't get a reply, try again when they call CQ. If you still don't get a reply, tune around and look for another strong station. So when you do get a station that replies, you can send a report to them. So let's imagine that their call sign is DX1XYZ and your call sign is M7ABC. So you could say DX1XYZ, you are 5 by 7 or 5 and 7 from M7ABC, Mike 7A Alpha Bravo Charlie. Typically, the other station will then send you a report. Mike 7A Alpha Bravo Charlie from Delta X-Ray 1, X-Ray Yankee Zulu. You're 5 and 5, back to you. You can then go on and send some other information like your name, your location, the equipment you're using. Likewise, he'll probably repeat to do something similar. And you can finish the contact by something along the lines of Delta X-Ray 1, X-Ray Yankee Zulu, thanks for a nice contact. Look forward to working you again, 73 from Mike 7 Alpha Bravo Charlie. Job done, first contact done, and you can now enter details of the contact in your log. Now I would suggest, although you're not required to by the license, I really do suggest keeping a log. Broadly speaking, you've got 3 options for log keeping. You can keep your log on paper. In fact, I would suggest starting out on paper, but I think fairly soon you'll want to move over to a computer logging system. An alternative is a spreadsheet, and that works very well in that it's simple. It's computerized but simple. The alternative is a full-blown computer logging system. Log4OM is the one that most people seem to like. It is complex. It has a lot of facilities. If you're interested or thinking about it, the Dover Amateur Radio Club has a Zoom talk tomorrow evening on Log4OM, and I would suggest that they're welcoming visitors. I'd suggest having joining in on that Zoom call to find out more about it. That's the Dover Amateur Radio Club. Right, almost at the end. We've talked a lot about contacts with microphones. Just briefly want to talk about data modes. Now, I know that data modes are not everybody's cup of tea. Basically, they involve communication via computers. So you don't use a microphone. You have a computer at one end talking to a computer at the other end over amateur radio. And they all use what is called a sound card, which basically converts sound to data, converts data to sound. Now these days you can find a sound card in some, but certainly not all, modern radios. They tend to be the more upmarket ones. You can have a freestanding interface, such as this signal link that you see in the picture, or you can use the sound card in your computer. But you need to make sure if you do that, that you've turned off all your noises that computers can produce when an email comes in or you press the wrong button. So you don't want any beeps and noises and music or anything like that coming out of your sound. They all work. I've used all three over the years. If I had the choice, if I had a radio which had a built-in sound card, I would certainly go for that. If not, the freestanding option works fine. I've been using a Signal Link for the last, I would guess, 9 months. Or you can use the sound card in your computer, and that works fine as well. I used that for several years with no problems. I just turned off the computer's ability to produce any sounds. Now, there's a number of different types of data modes. I'm just going to spend the last few minutes just talking very, very briefly about them. RTTY, radio teletype, it's basically based on the same principles as old mechanical teleprinters. Whilst you can send a message as long or as short as you wish, you can only use uppercase letters, so it's capitals only. You can also send numbers, but that's about it. It's prone to errors in that any interference, any fading, it won't do anything to attempt to make any corrections for that. But you can set up what are called macros to reduce your typing. So you can easily assign one of the buttons that's towards the center there. You might be able to see a 1 by 2, 1 times 2. Whereas if you press that button, it will send your call sign, send his call sign from your call sign twice. So DX1, XYZ, D, M7ABC, M7ABC. So just by pressing the button, it'll do that for you. With a bit of practice, and careful setting up, you can actually set macros up for most eventualities, for most sort of for sort of basic, what I'd call rubber stamp, straightforward contacts. You can tell them, what your hobby is, your name, the QTH, the equipment you've got, whatever. So it needn't be a sort of who's a flash-fingered typist to use RTTY, but you can do it that way. If you can type everything if you wish. Most people go for something that's principally macro based, but with some typing. PSK31 is sort of the next one up, I guess. You've got free format text. You can use upper and lower case. There is an element of error correction, but not very strong. And again, you can set up macros to reduce typing. And finally, the most recent, these are the new kids on the block, FT8 and FT4. Now, the big requirement here is that the time in your computer is very accurately set. It must be accurate to plus or minus a second or just over. The format of the messages that are sent are absolutely fixed. So you can't tell the station at the other end your name is Fred, or your transceiver is an ICOM XY123, or it's snowing. All you can do is exchange basically reports and the locator you're in. So it's great for weak signals and low power, but you are very, very seriously constrained about what can be conveyed. So that sort of is a very, very, very quick skim through data modes. Apart from one other, which is slow scan television. Now with slow scan television, you basically get yourself an image, a picture on your computer, and it's transmitted over a period of 1 to 2 minutes. The speed at which it happens depends on the particular slow scan TV mode. There's a whole range of them. There are also some digital modes which will produce a better quality picture, but you either get a picture or you don't. Whereas with analog slow scan television, the picture builds up line by line by line by line. And there is some activity on from the International Space Station. I think there was even some activity today, although I didn't see it myself. So that concludes my romp through data modes and concludes the talk. Just bear in mind that most amateurs don't ever experience many aspects of the hobby. Now, when we come on to the talk, the discussion in a few minutes, my guess is that few, if any, of the people on the call will have done all of these. Microwaves, EME, bouncing signals off the moon, Aurora, bouncing signals off the Aurora Borealis, meteor scatter, bouncing signals off meteors as they pass off the ionized trail off the back of a meteor, contact through satellites, fast scan television, or been on a de-expedition. In other words, gone off somewhere remote for the purposes of making amateur radio contacts. So whatever you do, don't expect to do it all in the first few weeks or even the first few years, and have fun. So, end of my talk. I guess I need to stop sharing at this point. Let's do that. Okay, Nick, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Colin. As Colin said there, that's quite a run through of a whole range of different aspects of our hobby. So who wants to go first? And I'd particularly throw the floor open to any people who are not yet licensed amateurs but are interested or are very new to the hobby and have got questions they want to pose to Colin or other people. So but obviously anyone can tip into the discussion. Who wants to go first with a question or a comment? Just stick your hand up and don't be shy. I've got John, G8JMB, and then Andrew, M7GRE. You'll need to unmute, John. Is
that better?
That's it.
Right. My question is very straightforward. Excellent talk, Colin, and thank you very much. I would love to be able to forward that in its entirety to someone who's emailed me in the capacity of info@G4PRS. I guess he must have picked me up from the website of Google or something, who's inquiring after training and so on and what it's all about.
Okay.
Is there any way of doing that?
Yeah, I will send you the PowerPoint. The only thing is it's rather big. It's too big to go as an email attachment. So I'll find a way of getting it to you.
That would be very kind. And then I can forward it on to him.
Yeah, it may be I'll just break it into 3 chunks or something like that.
Yeah, it was an excellent overview. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Back to
Brilliant.
control.
Yeah, thank you, John. I've then got Andrew, M7GRE.
Yeah, thank you for that. Colin, I was just wondering, the maths booklet that you mentioned for the full license, the maths help booklet, is that also relevant for the intermediate exam?
It is. It is up to a point. I've not gone through it to check, syllabus item by syllabus item, what's relevant for which. To be honest, my suggestion would be download it and make use of it as you see fit.
Yeah, I think that's what I'll probably do anyway, because obviously intermediate's my next step, and maths has never been my strong subject. So any help I can have, they'll be, very welcome.
Yeah, I think you would find it useful. I know, for example, it covers resistors in series and parallel, for example.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Colin, for the reply there. Anyone else with a question or comment to Colin? Andrew Milner.
Yeah, I was just inquiring about the half-wave dipole antenna. Can you mount that inside your attic, for example, to make it discrete?
Yes,
outside.
You can. I have never done it, but I know of people who have. All I would say is make it a little bit longer than than the theory suggests. Measure the SWR and then prune it a little bit at each end equally until the SWR drops to a sufficiently low level.
But again, from point of ignorance, how much better will the reception be if it's outside of your roof, for example, and in the air outside?
I can't tell you exactly. It will certainly depend on the type of roof you have. It will certainly depend on how cluttered your loft is. If you've got loads of metal water tanks and the like up there, that's not going to help. Bear in mind that particularly if you go up in power, having a high power antenna in your roof is likely to cause some of that RF to get into your mains, into your telephone wires or television aerial feeders and things like that. So you're likely to get problems the closer your antenna is to domestic life. So my firm recommendation is to try and go to have your antenna outside. If you really, really, really cannot, then by all means try it indoors. But you may find, for example, that you just don't have enough space to put a 40-meter half-wave dipole in your attic.
No, I wouldn't. I don't think. But you can these types of antenna are the type that you could take down and put up when you're using them. I presume you don't have to leave them up there permanently, do you?
No, not at all. You can put it on pulleys. You can put them up, take them down. What I do is if I want to change bands, I just nip outside, lower it, swap over to a different dipole and pull it back up.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Darren.
Yeah, just to follow up on that one, the very first amateur radio station I ever visited was after a Denbydale surplus sale. I can't remember the gentleman's name or call sign, but he had I would think 10-meter beam, for want of a better word, pinned out on his rafters in the loft. And that worked an absolute treat. As a shortwave listener, his first contact that I saw was into Brazil. Okay, probably on the sunspot high, like we're heading into. But yeah, it can be done, no doubt about it.
Yeah, Andrew, you'll probably need the person to ask. I don't have a loft antenna at the moment, so I definitely have one. Frank Howe, Kilo 4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel from the States, is talking to the club in January. And when I spoke to him about 6 weeks ago, he was busy putting some more aerials into his loft space. So he already had a couple of aerials and he was adding some more. And Frank as well is running 300 watts of power in an antenna in his loft without blowing up anything in the house. So it can be done even on relatively high power. Of course, foundation licenses are limited to 10 watts, but I guarantee to you that you can get around the world on an antenna in a loft. I've done it.
Yeah, that's reassuring. Thank you.
And the other thing, Andrew, and Colin didn't say this, and Roger, you're going to come in just on aerials. You can bend them around the space. So in a loft, if you haven't got quite enough space to make a horizontal aerial or even the V-type shape that Colin was showing, if you bend it around, you will find it will still work. It will be slightly degraded, but it will match, and you can transmit from it and receive from it. Roger.
Yeah, just to add, yeah, you can cheat a lot with aerials. The thing is, you can't sort of go wrong. Just try it. Try what you can get what you can. More metal in the air, the better. It's simple. And just briefly on, I've forgotten who I was asking about the maths book. I put a link in the chat, and it's worth downloading. It's very specific to amateur radio. It's 60 pages. It only teaches you what you need to know. It doesn't go on waffling about stuff that's not very specific to amateur radio. It's got worked examples. It's good for intermediate. It gives an example. I just read one little bit where he said a popular question in the intermediate exam is and he goes through it step by step. So well worth it. I would recommend you download that. I send a link in the chat now to find it now for save you typing it in again.
Yeah, and Andrew Milner, Andrew M7GRE. Do you mind, Andrew? I'll just share your pictures from your QRZ page. Has got a couple of antennas. If I share it, Andrew, why don't you just talk through what you've got in your loft space there?
What it was a design that I saw for in a copy of Radcom for a slinky double antenna, which is obviously made, I don't know if you know, Andrew, but it's obviously made from two child slinky springy toys. So obviously your space, you get more wire in the space because it's springy. And I've slung it up on the rafters, as you can see, and fed it with twin down into the shack. And then there's a design as well to make your own balloon to convert it down into coax to go into the back of your well, I use a tuner because obviously I'm using it for different HF bands. It's and I find that it tunes fine on all bands apart from 80 meters. It won't tune on 80, but the rest of the bands it tunes up fine. So but obviously I'm only using 10 watts on it. I don't know how you'd go on, as you say, with higher power, but I can only use 10 anyway on my license. But that's what I'm using at the moment. Up to now, my furthest contact has been Tunisia, so, you know, but that's what I'm using.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks for telling me about that, Andrew. That's great, just to share your pictures there.
No problem.
Okay, who else had their hand up? Anthony, M0IFA.
Okay, a couple of things. I have also one of these Wisley antennas in my loft. Unfortunately, I put it up and found that it now resonates at 8.3 megahertz, and I've got to get up there and stretch it a bit longer, but I will do eventually. The second point is that in the Banbury Radio Club, where I am a member, we ran a very, very successful evening, both for existing members and for people that weren't yet licensed. And this we called the Summer Pixie Challenge. I think you probably know, everybody will know, that you can buy for about £3 a little CW transceiver from the eBay Chinese websites, which is very easy to construct. And we bought, I don't know, I think it was 20 of these, and we had 20 members sitting in the club room and on tables outside because we didn't have enough space. And the challenge was, first of all, to build the receiver, and the first person that received a CW signal that was being sent by an automatic Arduino-driven CW station, and to decode it and bring it up to the judges won a prize. And the second prize was someone to have a communication with somebody else passing a secret code. So we had a two-way Morse code communication. Each pixie, of course, just had a little 4-foot wire antenna on it. And that proved to be a very successful 2 or 3 club evenings.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Anthony. Who else was putting their hand up? I'll come back to you, John. Just
Yeah,
with some of
sure.
the... Yeah, go on, John. Yeah, far away.
Yeah. Couple of points. Dipole, splendid antenna, very simple. If you go to nearly all the antenna books, which copy one from another, they don't tell you that if you use insulated wire, it won't tune the same. And that's a thing that needs bringing out, that if you use household wiring wire, which is the most cost effective, I find, unless you've got cash, it needs to be about 3% shorter than if you use bare copper. Little point, but it's a puzzlement that's glossed over. And I think a lot of antenna books just copy one from the other, and the little things like that just get left out. The other is linear power supplies, just checking what I've got, and you can still buy them about £10 more than the equivalent rating as a switcher from various people. That's 25, 30 amp. And the other thing for the beginner is an awful lot of rigs are so complicated, so many features, so many downloads, menus and things. It's so easy to get so lost. All right, I'm a radio telephone operator, but it's just a little thing to bear in mind, perhaps, that some of the new things, the operability of them, especially if you're coming to it cold, I'll be polite and say it's not good. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, and yeah, thanks for that. And just pick up a couple of things in the chat. Colin, one of our local members up here, he disappeared off the screen for a second. G0PMY and his son Richard, made a comment on the chat saying thank you very much, and a very interesting contribution. And Richard's son, I think you said, is interested in possibly doing the foundation license. Can I just ask you, Richard, and your son, and anyone else who's listening tonight, including Andrew, if we do put on some Zoom meetings specifically for people who are studying to do their license, where, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 people can get together regularly and just have a chat about what they're finding difficult, what they don't understand. Do you think that would be helpful to you in the new year?
It would for me.
Yep.
I'm thinking that I'd like to begin it in January anyway.
Yeah, Essex Ham have got one, I think, if you look on their website, Andrew, I think on the 6th of Jan.
Yeah.
Richard, do you think that would be of interest to you and your son?
Yeah, certainly. I think I've just been asking him now, and it's getting him into the meetings and bits and pieces, and him seeing what it's all about, as opposed to everybody telling him what it's all about. So now he's just seeing that a little bit more, and I think obviously having getting into the swing of it, he's got a lot of work with school and bits and pieces and stuff coming up for his. Because he's just coming into he's in his final year for his GCSEs, but it'd be great to try to fit some bits and pieces in and amongst, and just at least training his brain in that direction, so that he is ready when he has got that little bit of spare time to finally do that. But I think the Zoom meetings will be a great idea moving forward next year. Yeah,
M7MYR just sent a message in the chat saying that he did the Essex Ham Foundation course, online course. They're free of charge, so nothing to stop your son Richard signing up to that. And you know, they're not that frequent. They're very simple. Nice. It's run by nice guys. You know, you'll find that of great interest.
Yes, certainly. We'll have a look into that.
Yeah, Gerald.
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much for that talk. It was really interesting. I've been teaching radio since about 1974, I think, the first class I ran. But I've just been through all the new syllabus and prepared up any materials that we might need for both the foundation and intermediate so far. I haven't got round to starting on the advanced, but I've got all the information available and able to present it in. I've chopped it down into small half-hour sections, so it would run on my free Zoom if we need it to, and could pick up on any sections that you find difficulty, or we could run through some basic things as well, whatever you need. So that's all prepared up and ready now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gerald. That'll be good. Okay. I'm just going to show, this is just fun and frolic, but I'll look for it. I'll take another question while that person is talking. I'll just show you something in a second that will probably surprise Richard and Andrew and others. Anyone else got a question or a comment they want to put to Colin? Yeah, Jeff.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I just have some short comments on maybe also on the discussion we had before.
Sure, yeah,
Colin.
go on. Yeah, fire anything.
I mean, I'm thinking, and it was a point of John, I think, about SVLing. Well, if you are not in the position as a young person or as to set up an antenna or to have a receiver or a transceiver to do some SVLing, you still have some web SDRs where you can listen to shortwave, you can listen to the QO100 satellite, you can listen to VHF, UHF. That's a cheap way to do some SVLing. Okay, it's not real stuff, but anyway, it will give you a flavor of what's going on the different bands. And also, in addition to what Colin told about digital modes on VHF, the D-Star, the DMR, and so on, you also have some free apps on Android especially, where you can use the D-Star, DMR, and so on, and some are even cross-mode. So like Peanuts is one of them, Droid Star is one of them. So this will cost you nothing. But anyway, as a licensed amateur, you can use that. It's a little bit like Echolink actually, but actually it's you can go to reflectors and so on, hear the Americans talking and things like that. Another activity maybe for newcomers or that you can give in the framework of courses is maybe interview members. We have different members in our club, and maybe interview them on certain aspects of the hobby, or how did they get into the hobby, what were their obstacles to proceed, and so on. So that can also be helpful, together with some small records, some small videos that you can record. And I think also very important is give new licensed persons, give them a mentor. Someone that they can ask whatever they want. I mean, maybe that person will not have all the answers. Most probably that will be the case. But anyway, he can forward people to other members who might have the answer. So that's some comments on some issues we have discussed this evening.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Jeff. Gerald just sent me notes saying Richard's got his hand up. Which Richard has got their hand up? Just unmute yourself. Yeah, go on, Richard. RBG.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting, Colin. And I'm one of the old timers who had a 42-year gap before I came back into the hobby. And when we were chatting before the formal meeting started, excuse me, I suggested that the one thing that's missing is perhaps being a shortwave listener. You learn so much by listening to other amateurs, and particularly nowadays when you can look on QRZ and see what antennas they've got and what equipment they use, which you couldn't do in my early days. But I think you suggested 600 newcomers coming into the hobby every month, and I think you suggested that a lot of them don't really know what the hobby is all about. And you know, you newcomers, don't forget the exam is just the beginning. It's a means to an end, and don't get too hung up about it. You'll learn to be a radio ham when you get on the air and have a go yourself. That's what amateur radio is about, not the maths and all the other stuff. And, you know, join a local club. I know we can't do it now with Corona, but join a club, come along, meet other amateurs, go to the special event stations, and you'll learn how to put antennas up, connect different radios to a computer. And that's how you learn about what the hobby is all about. But as I say, by shortwave listening, you can hear all that and work out for yourself. Why do you want a license, and what do you want to achieve when you've actually got a license? I think that's very, very important.
Yeah, thank you, Richard.
With that little 2-meter net, I wouldn't suggest anybody listens to it to learn anything, because during the lockdown, we're talking a load of nonsense. But we have one relative newcomer, and he's one who keeps swapping radios, swapping antennas. And as Colin said, that's not the way. Settle with what you've got and enjoy doing it, rather than keep changing, thinking you can make it better. I used to play golf, and I used to swap my clubs every other week. I was still a rubbish golfer, however much I paid for them. And a little bit it's like that with amateur radio. Learn how to operate your station and listen the techniques to get the best out of it.
Fully agree with you that.
Yeah, a poor operator can operate the best station in the world and get nothing. A good operator can operate a poor station and get everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to show, and this is more for Andrew Milner and Richard with their shack aerials. When I started as a young radio amateur, and one or two of the old guys in this room might remember this, the Partridge joystick. Anyone remember the Partridge joystick?
Oh yes, do.
I had one of those. He produced, I think it was G3CED. He produced 2 different varieties of this small vertical area, an outdoor one and an indoor one. And I had this indoor one. It was about 7 foot high, and I lived on the 2nd floor of a block of flats, and it was lying against the wall of the block of flats. And I made my first ever contact on 20 meters Morse code to Australia using this aerial. Yeah, albeit I was using 150 watts from my transmitter, but nevertheless, you can get enormous distances with very, very simple aerials. And the old Partridge joystick was a good example of that. So I just wanted to share that because who was it who said in the discussion just earlier, just have a play? I think it was you, wasn't it, Andrew, M7GRE, or someone else said it as well. Just have a, Roger, it was, just have a play with bits of wire and, you know, see what you can make that actually does receive. And when you've got a transmitting license, will enable you to put out a signal as well. You'll be amazed, utterly amazed. Right, before Colin comes back, have we got anyone else who wants to chip into the discussion?
Nick, I'm sorry, I've got to leave the call now, but
no, that's fine. All right, good to see you, Andrew.
Very informative, and thank you very much, Colin, for a very, very informative program tonight. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. Colin, do you want to say a few words and just closing this up?
Yeah, there's probably only one thing. I think it's really to just emphasize that you don't need to run a lot of power to make contacts all around the world. Now, we've just come through, well, we're just going through the sunspot minimum, which most people would accept is one of the worst times to make contacts on amateur radio. And since about June, I've made something over 1,000 contacts on mainly 20, 15 and 10 meters throughout the world, from the west coast of Canada, sorry, the west coast of the States, Japan, South Africa, South America, Pakistan, Indonesia, all running 10 watts or less. Now, to be fair, those are almost exclusively data mode, which is why I wanted to include data mode at the end of the talk. But you really don't need a lot of power, and I'm not doing anything to make those contacts that I haven't described this evening. So 10 watts into a dipole. So you really can make a lot of contacts with low power, with not a lot of hard work. You need to have your wits about you, but that's all. So, you know, the 10 watt limit of a power with foundation license is not a problem. You can make lots of contacts with 10 watts.
Brilliant. Well, Colin, thank you very much indeed. Can we show our appreciation to Colin as we normally do for his contribution? Thanks very much, Colin. That was very good.
Thanks, gents.